first up. Do I just keep going? There we are. I'm a slight fraud here today because I am also a member of the Mental Health Task Force, and when they saw my name down on this as speaking today, they said, "Oh, could you take some information about the task force too?" And I actually thought you would probably be interested as well. So you'll see I've got a sort of blend of information, both from Young Minds and myself, and I've brought in some of their information as well. But we're very happy to answer questions about that later on. So you'll see a sort of mixture here. I thought what we've just heard, I think this follows on from Dinesh's presentation incredibly well. And I think the other interesting thing, or going on to this first slide, is actually how the Department of Health's attitude has shifted incredibly actually over the last few years, and how they are singing from the same hymn sheet in many ways in terms of the paucity of provision for children and young people, and the real crisis that we're now experiencing, and I think will continue to face unless something fairly radical happens. So this is a Department of Health slide, but actually it so closely reflects what I normally say. I thought I'd include it. That there are really big issues facing the system. One of the things I first of all wanted to ask was how many of you here work with children and young people, either in the community or in CAMS type services? All right, okay, a good smattering, great. So it is very relevant. So as you'll know, in particular, stigma affects, I think, young people and how they feel about coming to mental health services. The visibility of services, we run a parents' helpline, and the biggest issue is there's nothing there. Where is it? What is there out there? I am desperate for help for my child, and I just don't know where to go. I've been to the GP, nothing. I've been to the school, nothing. Nobody knows how they access this service. Sorry, you can hear it right. Okay, you can't hear me. I'm not shouting loud enough, obviously. And then the capacity of the service is seriously compromised, which I'll go on to. So these other issues, the varying thresholds, I will also come on to. Transition CAMS to AMS, very well-known issue, the lack of data. One of the things that myself, coming from the voluntary sector, I have been very stunned by how little data, and every time we question the data and go a bit further down the line, it seems to evaporate. What is actually meaningful is very small. The risk of perverse incentives, and that's what we're seeing at the moment around thresholds mounting, and the disinvestment in services, the cuts that have been experienced across the piece, we know, but how it's affected children's services has been particularly devastating. So the disinvestment, we have carried out freedom of information questions now for 5 years. And what they have shown is that year on year services have been cut, and where that's happened has been in particular with the local authority funding of the Tier 2 services. So those are the ones that are most frequently delivered by the voluntary sector or in partnership with the local CAMS service, the statutory service. And those vital step up, step down services have been radically cut, which has meant that what CAMS have experienced, as in the tier 3, the statutory CAMS, what is sometimes called specialist services, they have experienced an onslaught. And so in terms of managing that, their thresholds have gone up. So that has been particularly bad. What's available all over the country varies hugely. We've experienced some areas that have cut by 95%, other areas that have invested by similar amounts. There's no rhyme or reason across the piece. So what you find locally, it will not compare to what you'll have in a next door area. So as we see things pushing towards crisis and specialist CAMS now feeling overwhelmed, and what we're seeing in the future, sorry to be the voice of doom and gloom, but it is further big cuts for local authorities on the way. Talking to local authorities, they're saying, you ain't seen nothing yet. What's coming in down the line is devastating. And the trouble is, where we are now experiencing support, and that's from public health, that ring fence comes off in 2016-17. So the funding that has at the moment enabling some quite interesting work to happen also then comes up for grabs. So that's the bad news, and this is the effect that we're seeing. So the green lines is how things should work. So a young person is experiencing some difficulties. They are able to access Tier 2 services, and that might be enough. And so then they come back out into their community and family life. If that's not enough, they can pass through and have additional support, specialist input from Tier 3 services. Hopefully that would then resolve their mental health problems, and again they would come out of the mental health system, and if not, would be able to access Tier 4 services. And that is increasingly what we are not seeing. Young people trying to access Tier 2, not being able to, skirting over the top, the red line, straight into Tier 3. And now we're seeing not able to access Tier 3 services either, scooting straight over the top, their problems escalating to such an extent that where they are first getting support is in an inpatient or crisis care. This is sadly not unusual. Sadly, when I describe this, I have a lot of nods in the audience. What we really need to do is get this understanding out there and really look at how we can change the structure of this service. So just moving back out to the wider context, the good news, this is quite amazing, is that that children and young people's mental health has absolutely risen up the agenda. One of the things I now am saying fairly repeatedly is we have got a golden opportunity here. We have got to make this stick, and we have got to push really hard now so that we can make as much progress as we can, so that when this spotlight does move off, which it will, because there are fashions all the time, sadly, we have made some significant change which does not move away, we don't lose. And so I think this is the really encouraging point about today, that yes, it is really bad out there, and it is difficult both for you as the staff in those services as it is for the children, young people and families. But there is an opportunity now, and I do believe that. One of the things is around the interest in early intervention. And I'm not going to go through this slide because I'm sure you know it, but we have got evidence and that there are real benefits to early intervention, and people are very interested in this now. So there is an opportunity again to change this cycle that is set up of escalating illness. The problem is around how we persuade commissioners to do this double investment that will be needed initially. How am I doing on time? Right. So what do we want for young people? What we need to think about, and what we want commissioners to think about and be aware of, is that where you get help is everywhere in the community. In schools are crucial, and what they can offer. They are connected as well to other services in the community, to activity-based activities, so which make you feel good if that's what you like. Drop-in centres where young people feel relaxed about going, comfortable, what Dinesh was talking about access. That other places that are offering services like the domestic violence areas have got crucial connections as well that we need to understand. That young carers are part of this picture, and they are connected into the community and into school. And there needs to be these arrows going everywhere, all over the place. We don't want services located in one place by one service deliverer. So that what you then can have is a pathway for young people which is across the piece of need, and that the commissioners are working together and know what those pathways can look like, and where services are that are offering different types of care across the CAMHS pathway. One of the key bits that I was asked about was around the role of schools. And one of the things I think that schools can play in this is about understanding risk around mental health and having more confidence about both identifying those things, but also being able to access CAN specialists and being able to refer appropriately when needed. This is a piece of work that I won't go into this more now. Do please look at our website. We've got a lot of resources for schools and also a way for teachers to identify and audit need and what they might respond with. And I also wanted to just make you aware of Head Start. I don't know if any of you are in Head Start areas around the country. There are 12 of them. And Head Start is looking at building resilience of children, young people 10 to 14 years. But one of the key bits about this is that it is around joint working programmes and having and building the body of evidence. One of the key bits that we're involved in as the advisory group is banging on about measurement, and that we need to have measurable change around this to actually build this evidence around building resilience and early intervention, because this is what is still weak. It's an example of a public health actually delivering services. I'm conscious that we have got very, very short of time, so I'm going to go on to the task force. You'll all be aware of the mental health task force, and it's just started a couple of months ago, and it's on a race. It's got 6 priorities that it is committed to doing, which are these. Again, I don't want to go through them. They're here, and I'm sure we can make them available for you if you haven't seen them. How it's delivering the work, it's a huge group of people. It's 40 to 50 people involved in the task force from across quite a wide range of backgrounds. One of the very good things is that the DFE is very centrally involved in this as well, alongside DH and NHS England, which in itself is a bit of a marker, a bit of a change. We've seen a huge shift since there's been a change of Secretary of State for education, which is fantastic news, I have to say. So the real work is being carried out in task and finish groups. And I co-chair the vulnerable groups and inequalities one, that's the one I know most about and will say a bit more about. The key bit I think here is for that group is around how social care, so the Department of Education and Department of Health and NHS England can come up with some ideas and strategies that are going to work across the piece. And this is where some of the most needy young people are, but the ones who fall through the net the most are also. The timetable for this is extraordinary. You know, we have the political timetable of the next election, and that is absolutely what, Norman Lamb, I think, was trying to push this through as his last-ditch attempt to actually have some concrete progress before the next election and possibly the Lib Dems not doing so well. And so this started in November, it finishes in January, and already we're writing up suggested recommendations for discussion and consultation. And there'll be the report coming out in March. So really this is watch this space. And it is quite scary because it is such a race. And in terms of the vulnerable groups and inequalities, what you will know is that these are the young people who have real difficulty accessing services. Sometimes these are the young people who hit up in CAMHS and CAMHS saying, well, there isn't actually a diagnosable mental illness here. We can see that there's lots of need and mental health need, but there isn't actually a diagnosis for us to have specific treatment pathways. So this means that actually these young people end up getting very little or nothing at all. I think the other point is that those in social care who are working with them and providing support themselves feel very unconfident and often unskilled about how to react best, what to do for the best. And this stigma creates real fear around what to do and not wanting to make things worse. So some of the things that we've been looking at have been models of how can we change access to some of the more senior clinicians within CAMS to actually make them available for consultation, advice to frontline staff in other parts of the system, so that teachers or a head teacher can have access to a consultant psychiatrist and say, I'm worried about this child, so that concerns can be explored and referrals can be, if they need to be made, can be made directly, but that they are appropriate referrals. So there is this same need of gatekeeping that CAMS is feeling at the moment, but that also that will create a development of skills on the job, if you like, within those other institutions. We've also been looking at how the pathway, how access can be much more simple for these young people, and how services actually need to be out in the community, and how we use outreach and activities, so that these are the young people who won't go to clinic appointments, whose lives are more chaotic than others. How can CAMS respond much more effectively, rather than expecting young people to come to them? I'm not saying that happens everywhere, but there is a pattern of that. So these are some of the things that is coming out of the group at the moment. What's also happening is there are already some co-commissioning pilots have started, or not, they haven't started, they're just being allocated at the moment. I know the proposals have come in. So that will be an interesting way to see how can we do system change rather than just one line, the single line of funding. And this is very interesting. The Department of Health is very confident, so this is their slide, that this will make a difference. And I think I'm reasonably cynical about this. I think it's really important. Coming back to my first point, we have an opportunity for change, and this is a real opportunity, but there are a number of risks along the way. But I am really pleased that the Department of Health is so confident about it. So there is information here about them and information about us.
Thank you.
How long have I got?
7 minutes.
Have I?
Yes. Sorry.
All right, okay. I'll skip over me. I suppose the main message from today is that we've taken all you've heard today and we've tried to turn it on its head. So rather than putting up the drawbridges and trying to restrict demand as best we can to our own workforce, we've tried to do something completely different. This is Einstein's idea, and try to get a whole philosophy. It's not just a pilot, it's not just a model, it's a philosophy of trying to approach young people. My background's in intervention psychosis, so I believe passionately that we can intervene early, we can do things differently down the line, and it makes a difference. I can't go through this, but basically we looked at a bunch of young people in our 14 to 18-year-old EI team, a lot of whom, as you'd expect, would have psychotic symptoms, but we find out now that's pretty normal amongst the general public, and the more distressed you are, the more normal that is anyway. You also present with a lot of other psychosocial problems, housing, social contact, education, and we have CAMS teams, and we have adult teams at the moment actually often, which aren't set up to address those. And our belief is that if you increase your social contact, your psychotic symptoms go down, rather than giving the risperidone to improve your life. So it's about doing something more holistic. And and it worked. Most of the people went back to general practice. So we came up with this principles that this is about 4 years ago. This is a big evolution of a service. And we used a lot of what Sarah said. We hit upon, through working with the Clark in Cambridge, what Young Minds were putting out and other agencies about young people really not liking the way services were offered, it not being appropriate. And you put that with the early intervention argument, and you think, well, maybe we need to go out and find them, rather than just try and avoid finding them because it's actually just too much demand on our workload. So the principles roughly are they've got to be youth-orientated and not stigmatising. Young people would want to naturally engage with it. It should be a place in Norwich or a website is advertised everywhere. You go onto that and that directs you to where you need to go. Not as happens where I live. If somebody in my village comes and says, I'm worried about my daughter, what should I do? I don't really know, if I'm honest with you. There's a load of different things you could do, none of which talk to each other. So it's about trying to get over that. It's about being recovery focused, And further down, which is important to me, is about promoting self-management and working with diagnostic uncertainty. Those are EI principles pretty much. But we don't diagnose you with depression. We say it's more of an emotional problem and we'll help you overcome it by dealing with other aspects in your life. This, actually, Rachel was one of our youth council. So Rachel, I couldn't figure out how to go about doing this, and it's where this has been one of the most powerful things that's happened. Rachel, early on, she got to know what we were trying to do, and she tried to map out what the service should actually look and feel like. Forget primary, secondary care, voluntary sector, IAPT. This is what it should feel like. And she'd been through the services. I didn't really get better, she said, until she moved into a voluntary sector, supported housing. She came up with lots of stuff, actually, lots of good ideas, as many of our youth council did. You'll see on there things like peer support workers, easy points of access, non-discriminating, and that's probably a voluntary sector we had in mind, having access or a teacher to me or to my team if they need it. So this is the overall model. I've got time to go through this. The idea is that we have got a youth IAPT, which is linked to our youth service, a big service, all of central Norfolk. So we have 50 referrals a week, something like that, coming in, 14 to 25-year-olds. The only way to manage that is we're trying to help other agencies manage what they do anyway. Where young people go initially, that could be a teacher. Rather than pick it out and diagnose it and give it back to the teacher, the problem, you say, well, how can we support you keeping it ongoing? So we reach out as much as we can, particularly to the voluntary sector. The voluntary sector is where young people repeatedly say they're the experts in engaging us, giving us what we want, and helping us get better. If the voluntary centre need any support, section need any support, they've got instant access to us, and supervision in joint groups and all those things. So we go out looking for issues. If there are problems that need case management in an EI style, we've got a range of different ways of approaching that. We have a lot of, say, emotionally dysregulated young people. Self-harm's rife, risky behaviour's rife. So we're trying not to diagnose that as bipolar, when, as Pat McGorry from Australia says, we don't know if it's bipolar. It might become bipolar, or unipolar depression, or it could be personality, it could just be a phase. We don't know what that's about. And calling it bipolar when you're 16 sets you on a trajectory, in my view, which is very hard to get off. So it's about trying to call it what it is. You've got problems managing your emotions. We will teach you to manage your emotions. And medication like in our AIT might be a part of that for now, and for a small proportion, a must do. But you'll have to learn that for yourself. There's no point in me lecturing you. And it goes on to looking for crisis houses, as Dinesh talked about, and into our tier 4. We've got our own in-house enhanced or crisis team because it works better, because it's a sort of youth philosophy. It's got to be young person appropriate. Every appointment, the youth council will have to approve of every person. It's the right sort of person to work in the service. Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do. Actively engage people, particularly those at high risk. Our theory, I haven't got time to go into it, is that most people with young problems will settle down and don't need to come anywhere near me. But if that doesn't happen, that needs to quickly come to me or my team. That's the philosophy. And providing support to the system, not just to the person. I won't go through the problems of transitions. The reason for 14 to 18-year-old service was in our trust, like every other trust in the country, when you turn 18, the intervention you get is under half, despite the demand being clearly just the same. So there's a big dropping off a cliff on the green side when you turn 18 in terms of contacts, despite referrals into the system being exactly the same. And that's via GPs, never mind young people saying, can you help me please? And I won't talk you through the data from our youth pilot, other than to say two things. One is that when we looked at this is quite severely distressed young people, 80% said they got significant social anxiety. So if you start to run an outpatient-based clinic service and that's your lot, you're not going to access those people because they're not going to come and see you, or they won't do the things that stop them being depressed, like going to see their friends or going out and doing stuff, because their social anxiety gets in the way of them doing antidepressant activities. The other big thing to say is trauma amongst this group, however, is just, it's the norm, actually, which is distressing to say. So we need services that can somehow conceptually deal with that, not so you do your trauma work with them and your housing work with them and then with something else. It has to sort of pull together. We use a model called AMBIT, which is the Anna Freud Centre, for trying to help us think that way. And we're big on improving functioning, as we've heard a lot about today, getting back to college, getting back to school, getting out and doing stuff with your time. Most young people in our pilot were doing nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to 65 hours per week of meaningful activity. So and the social anxiety links to that, and the trauma and avoidance links to that. So it's about changing a sort of vicious trap they've got into. So I'll just finish. That's quite good. Basically, we have the trust made us. This is another problem. Institutions make you do things which young people say that's not going to work. And we've got Rachel's diagram to say this is what they're wanting. There's no point having one single point of access and that's your lot, and it has to be via GP because they're not going to access that. So we accept referrals from anywhere, despite the trust having its single point of access. For all 14 to 25-year-olds come into our youth service, but we have a dedicated 0 to 14, more attachment, more family-focused team, in order partly to protect resource and a philosophy for them, for the younger group. My EI service still carries on the same, but interestingly, who's in EI and who's a severely distressed young person has become a bit arbitrary, because voices in the youth service are pretty well the norm if you're distressed, as they are in the EI service. So we're debating that a lot. The overall point is that it feels more like Apple works on your phone. You know, you don't have to know how the apps work. You don't have to even merge them together. Somehow your care matches together, whether it's through the voluntary sector or social care or education. So if the teacher wants support, they know to come to us for support. That's the plan. And it's working. So thank you very much.
Thank you.